ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Dharma Digs podcast, a podcast in pursuit of purposeful living. I'm your host, Taylor Winchester, also known as TW, and as always, I'll say it as I do always. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to stop by and tune into this podcast. I greatly appreciate it, and it means a lot to me, so thank you. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to drop a few housekeeping items as I've started to do in recent episodes. Obviously, you found your way here to consume this podcast, which I greatly appreciate. But if you have a few moments and can tap that follow button, whether it be on iTunes or Spotify or YouTube or wherever it is you digest this podcast, maybe please follow. That would help me out. And if you have a little bit of extra time, just a few minutes maybe, drop a comment or two in the review section and let me know what you think. Let other folks know what you think. It really helps me in a sense of what type of content you want to hear about, but also helps the show to rank a little bit higher on all those platforms. So if you're enjoying what you hear, well, even if you're not enjoying, just let me know. That way I understand what it is you do and don't like about this podcast. All right, on to the good stuff. Today's conversation features none other than Mary Sparr, who is owner of Young Mary Records. She has worked in and around the live music industry for quite some time now, but her current role finds her managing some amazing Americana and country artists such as Ian Noe, Morgan Wade, and Elizabeth Cook, all of which I've had an opportunity. That's actually what led me to becoming acquainted with Mary, and we've worked together on a promotion of a couple of events for her artist, specifically recently with the Bristol Rhythm and Roots reunion. And yeah, Mary has some great insight. She's really worked her own way up and kind of found her way through the industry. She is someone that likes radical truth, inherent kindness, and hillbilly genius, which we talk a little bit about in this episode. So without further ado, I'll let you get right into it. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I really had a great time, and Mary shares some great insight for any aspiring artist into kind of what it means to cut your teeth in the industry and some of the ways you can grow, and in a sense of bringing some other team members on to help you grow as well. So without further ado, let's get down to the conversation, and I will introduce you to Miss Mary Sparr. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Enjoy the conversation. Mary Sparr, welcome to the Dharma Digs podcast, and thank you so much for being here and joining me today. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I am too. For the listeners who just heard this introduction of you, but I will kind of re-say that the fact that you and I came to get to know each other in the slightest bit, this is actually the first time we've ever met in person, visually or virtually, I guess you would say, but working on the Bristol Rhythm and Roots Reunion Festival and some of the artists you represent. And it's been great working with you so far. It's really cool also to have connected and followed you online. And I love indulging in the conversation pieces you start on Facebook particularly.
Thank you. It's my cross to bear is what I say about it, because it is a slippery slope sometimes too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's social media in general, right? But so why don't you give listeners just a real quick elevator speech or introduction of Mary Sparr?
Yeah. I am a few years into being a full-time artist manager. And I've also had my own label and done A&R for other labels and myself. If you told me 10 years ago that I was going to be working independently for myself in the music business, I would not have believed it. So it's still shocking to me whenever people come by and say, like, you fill out a form for something and they say, where are you employed? And I say, I'm self-employed. Like, that seems like to me, just from growing up and not really knowing any self-employed people, that was like, that was like, oh, you sell candles or something, no shade to the candle sellers out there. But so I started out because I was making the common mistake of dating a bunch of musicians in a row. And then I had the epiphany that maybe I was good at helping them get things done. And then I just kind of, I started, I have a English degree, and I was working at a magazine. I was doing publicity. I was dabbling in all the things creative and work mashed together. And then I kind of found my stride when I started doing full-time artist management about 5-6 years ago.
And did you go straight in full-time self-employed, or did you start kind of working with a management company to kind of cut your teeth, so to speak?
So I actually, and I think that that's something that a lot of people ask me too. They just assume that you get one job and another job like any normal like company or corporate atmosphere, because there is some level of corporate to the music business, as much as we like to pretend there isn't. But I actually interviewed a company that was a merch company. I was a writer working for a publication, and I interviewed them and did a piece on them. And then afterward, they asked me, they were like, hey, we don't really want to talk to people. We just want to make the art. Would you be willing to do sales for our merch company with artists and their managers? And we'll give you a commission. And I was like, oh, of course, that's a great job. And then from there, I progressed onward, where I was meeting managers all the time and having conversations with them, and like kind of gleaning from them like what their job was. And I had that same kind of, it's like epiphany after epiphany, like, oh, if they can do this, maybe I could pull off at least half of this or some of this. And so I met somebody through the merch company. Then I started working on the road. I was selling merch for an artist on a tour. And then I kind of graduated to tour managing. And then I found the first artist. I listened to music all the time. I would have people out on the road when I was just selling merch. I'd be like, send me your records. And I would listen to them. And for like 2 years, I had received all these records from artists all over America from just touring. But I never found one that I was like, this is something I'm going to put like all my stuff into. And then I finally found one and just went kind of all in. I knew enough people by that time that once I had the thing I wanted to do, I knew what to do with it resource wise. And I think that's like something that people rush to a lot. They want to, as soon as they meet someone that can do something for them, they want to use that resource like that instant. And I accidentally, not even on purpose at the time, but looking back on it, I recognize it now. Like I was able to just know these people, not ask them for anything, and then wait till the important thing was there and they could trust me. Like, oh, this is what I want you to help me with. So then from that point on, it was a very big struggle. I drove around in like a Mitsubishi Mirage with an artist all over America. I borrowed every last penny from my mother, my father, people that I knew. I was almost getting to like intervention status with them. And then the record came out and it did great.
Nice.
And so I just kind of kept rolling from then on.
Yeah, well, that's a very, I mean, it's an artistic and creative approach, which is something I can obviously relate to and appreciate. And I mean, I think folks that from the outside looking in on the creative world and music, and as a musician or a striving professional musician or making a money in this industry, can at least understand a little bit that it's a grind and it's a struggle. But it's always interesting, and I enjoy hearing, especially folks like yourself that have really paved their own path, because there's no one easy way. And personally, that I was going to grad school for entertainment business, doing it all online, but got an internship with Live Nation, which is, a major company in the grand scheme of live music. And that opportunity isn't always there for a lot of people. And while I joke, like I was probably the oldest intern ever, because I was older than half the people working there at the time, because I was like 27 in grad school. But
Right.
You just have to figure it out, and that's cool. I think especially any musicians or artists that are listening would certainly find some encouragement out of that story, and hearing that it's not easy. It's not just like you flip a switch and you figured it out. So we're still figuring it out,
Something the other day, someone had posted something just about how hard of a year it had been for them as a musician, which I agreed with totally. But I was trying to make the point to them that even like the biggest stars out there, like they were saying, I got like 2 or 3 gigs canceled, and I just can't stop thinking about how I worked so hard to get those gigs. And now I just cannot move on. Like I'm having trouble moving on. And I was like, artists that in your mind are quote unquote big, they have these losses and these failures all the time. They're just behind closed doors with their team. They are not posting them on Facebook to tell you like, hey, I was going to get this commercial and we worked really hard and I cut this whole song for it and then they didn't want it. Like, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you like, hey, I was going to be on this major tour and it didn't happen. Like, that's not, it just never quits. You're going to always have disappointment. And that's the nature of the business, like some level of it.
100%. Yeah. And I think if anything this year has shown, and this goes for any industry, but obviously we're talking about music and the stuff that we work in more of a day to day, but like, if you get too hung up on those challenges or those discouraging moments, you're never, I mean, if you don't move past them, then you're going to get stuck and you're going to probably either burn out or just decide to not keep pursuing that passion or that art form. So I think 2020 has been very unique in that way of trying to find the silver lining, or at least I hate to continue using the word pivot, but you can't just like, you can't let it stop you in your tracks, you know?
Yeah.
And I do feel, I mean, we talked before we went live here about kind of feeling like we're rounding that corner into better times. So that's a little bit of a good feeling at least. But so to get back a little bit within the theme of this podcast, mm-hmm. I was reading and researching you a little bit about your the article that Turn Up the Amp had in an interview with you, and you were talking about some of your times like right before pre-COVID, and I thought the story about Ian No, who you manage, and that whole John Prine experience was really cool. And one of the questions that I always pose to all my guests is like, how do you quantify or maybe define a sense of purpose that you get within your kind of role within the creative process for either yourself and or for your artists? But is there anything that kind of comes to mind for you that you really like kind of hones in on that definition of purpose within what you do within the business?
Yeah, I do know that I have kind of like a hillbilly moral set that I follow that is like kind of purpose driven, where no matter what, I know it sounds like hippy dippy and all lovey and stuff, and that's why I add the hillbilly part of it to it, because that creates a little bit more leeway. But just being kind and doing everything with intention, and I think that's the key to success. It's not only commercial success or financial success, but just personal success. Like for me, I'm very hands-on. Like not all every manager is different, obviously, but for me, I'm very hands-on. I talk to my clients pretty much every day. I consider them to be a friend to me before they're my clients. Like, yes, I have to be the one that delivers conversations to them that you don't always want to have with your friends.
Right.
But my intention, again, is always to create a space where they know who they are as an artist and they're just making stuff. Like something that is very hard during the first few years of musicians trying to break out is that they have to do all the jobs for themselves. And so I think that their purpose even gets lost in it sometimes, especially like in the age of social media. So when a manager comes along and you get a team, and then it just creates a environment where your purpose can be to make art. And so that's always like my ultimate goal. Like if they want to make a record and they have a vision for it, then my purpose is to create that space, whatever that means, like with books or, whoever we need to find for resources or just other members of the team to get something done. Like that's what it's about for me. And it's very rewarding because I myself, like, I went to school for creative writing. Like I have interest beyond just being a manager. Not saying that's not a priority, but I think I have a kind of an odd twist to myself because I understand just how important it is for me to create stuff. So I kind of tie my purpose and their purpose and just being this whole machine where there's an environment for inspiration.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, the industry, and as you're talking, you're kind of touching on a unique perspective of it, which is super valuable, I think, especially for aspiring artists, because you almost feel like you don't always see that light at the end of the tunnel when you're trying to do it all yourself. And to your point, and like I've been going through in 2020, I decided to sign up for this meditation enrichment program, and I'm actually getting certified to teach it eventually. But the cool thing about that is like they talk about returning to the essence of who you truly are, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying with when you're trying to turn your creative art into a business. That purpose sometimes can totally get lost because you're just having to push all those buttons and turn all those knobs that make the machine run. And sometimes you get away from that art side of it. So it's cool. Your purpose of what I'm hearing is kind of like your purpose is helping your artist find their purpose, or stay true to their purpose, which is,
and also protect the integrity of it. Like it's one thing I'm firmly against having yourself surrounded in a bubble of yes men, just because I've seen that tale just too many times, and it's a horrible incident, and it's not like the car wreck you want to look at. It's one you do not want to even have anywhere in the rearview mirror. But I do think like when you mix business with your art, it can like pop that protective bubble, and the best managers, and I don't do it perfectly all the time, everyone's going to fail at it, but the best managers keep that bubble intact for them to be able to do it, when there is a bad review and bad critics or a bad show, or just a lot of challenges, may they be personal or professional. It's creating the space.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, keeping them focused, or creating the space so that they can remain focused and kind of realize that sometimes that shit doesn't matter. The bad show is going to happen. The bad press is probably going to be there because you're not going to always have people that love you. So yeah, that's vitally important as well. So are those the only three artists you're working with really right now? Is Ian No, Elizabeth Cook, and Morgan Wade?
Management, yes. Okay. But I have like kind of a revolving stovetop of pots that just kind of percolate, and I have like some artists that are like very near and dear to my heart that I'm just waiting for them to get to the place where they're ready to do the next part of what it is for them. Like that's another thing that a lot of managers kind of have an expectation. And I think that early on when I was doing management, I did not know that I needed to be clear about that. And then now as I've gotten a little more experienced, I know that like I need to say clearly, like, this is the expectation of what we've got to do. Like I have to work with people that are hungry to go get after it. And there's some people that are in the pots on my stove that might be percolating, but they're not really ready to boil over quite yet, you know, and for a variety of reasons. So I keep an eye on a lot of people, and I also have done A&R for other major labels and independent labels, both, and just found them artists that I thought were worthy of going after and chasing. And it's something that I think I might like expand further into, just doing some like record label side releases where I'm not in a management role, but I like things that are tied to me to go a certain way. Yeah. So I'm very picky. I've been very picky about my management clients because I'm trying to only get folks that are just like right in that wheelhouse.
Well, I think that's important for a lot of people to hear, because I mean, something that I've always struggled with and trying to work on still is knowing when to say no, or knowing when that maybe that opportunity or that thing that's there, whatever it may be, isn't necessarily always what you have to do. And to try and be true, again, going back to like the essence and the purpose behind what you do, if you can manage and be aware of those expectations within yourself, then it's going to be way easier, especially in your role, to like hold your artist accountable to making sure they're staying true to their purpose and their essence of art. So I can appreciate that. Well, is there anything else, any other stories or anything you think of just that kind of like pops in your mind when you talk about, I love also too, I'm jumping around here, that I didn't realize, now it makes total sense when I read some of your stuff on Facebook, that you have this English degree, creative writing background. So That is interesting because I didn't necessarily know that until this conversation, but it makes so much sense now. So I did see a recent post. So you're writing poetry too, right? Like, do you put that out?
Yeah,
Do you?
I have like an entire essay / poetry collection that I've been. That's one silver lining of 2020 is like I've had the capacity and the bandwidth to do some work on my own stuff because, and you know, I have a to be transparent, I have a good self ego deflating like breakdown once every 3 months or so where I get really selfish and say I do all the work for everybody else and do nothing for myself and so you know but I've been working on those collections for a couple years now, and it's just now gotten to a point where I had a lot of material but I didn't know where it all belonged, and actually I think it's the musicians in my life that have, for better or worse, made me so conscious of what a collection is, because I found myself putting together these essays and poems like almost like records. Like I'm like thinking of them in an album format, even though they're not, based on like pace of what I'm saying and content and just the way people make a track list. Yeah. So I've been almost like overboard about that, but I'm hoping that I'm in like the editing stages of the collection now, and I'm hoping by like summer of next year I'll have something like a first thing out. And a lot of people, surprisingly enough, seem like really excited about it. Yeah. And it's weird to me because usually it's a lot easier for me to understand why they're excited about Elizabeth's record and Ian's record and Morgan's record, and like I see that clearly. But then when someone says like I want to read this book, I'm like, but wait, that's not what we're doing.
Well, and I think, I mean, that is spoken like a true artist, because I think also it's with exception of those, I'm blanking on the term that I would use, but majority of the artists I know they don't give themselves enough credit. You know, it's hard. I mean, even if they have fans and people that love their music, and especially artists that are kind of on that up and coming, trying to really grow their brand as an artist, it's hard sometimes to really put yourself out there and your art out there. So I think that's a little bit of kind of what I'm hearing is like, there's probably a lot of people that would really enjoy reading. And I was really intrigued by the post. I forget, it feels like it's been a couple weeks now, but that you put the picture of a trailer and there was some poem you were working on. And I was like, where can I find this poem? I want to read it. Yeah.
It's done now, but I'm not going to put it out because I'm the worst about putting stuff out there and not saving it. So it's one that I'm really proud of. So it's done. But I'm going to put it in the collection. And another thing is I was trying to separate two things because I wanted to do a collection about music business stuff and my stories and stuff. And I also wanted to do one that was personal. And for a long time, I was trying to meld the two. And I realized that they didn't need to exist in the same space. They both overlap for sure, but they just belonged in two different places. So I think my version of Tales from the Tour Bus will be separate a little ways down the line. Like, okay. I feel like people need to know me personally first.
Yeah, well, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I like so many others am looking forward to that release as well. You mentioned something there that I'm curious of your take on, since you kind of approached that, or at least this year, and the influence your artists have had on you has pushed you in a little bit of that, compiling it as a collection. What are your thoughts from a more music here, but like the whole putting singles out versus a full album these days, and some of the controversy over what the best way to consistently put content out there is?
I have mixed feelings, and I do think it's kind of depends on the artist and the project, as much as that seems like a cop-out. Like I myself personally am always going to want albums to exist, and I think that as history keeps scooting along, we're not going to lose sight of the album as much as it seems like it. Like I feel like, yes, obviously the single factory mode works. Like there's a reason that large scale stars are doing singles and singles and singles and singles to keep their revenue and keep their interest in their audience. And I get it. But at the same time, I feel like it's going to morph into a different place again. And we're still just going to value the album. Like, you know, you're never going to lose the accolades of album of the year, you know. Yeah. And just today, I think it was like Billie Eilish was talking about, I'm going to have you fact check it in post. She said that somebody asked her favorite songs of the year, and she said it would just all be one other artist record, all the tracks of their album. And I thought that's like just a testament right there. Like, she's the typical, like, here's this young person, and she wanted it to be a full album. She wasn't saying like, I want to pick so-and-so's or Ariana Grande's this and Cardi B. She was just like, this one album. So I think that it'll just change and tides will turn. I also think that genre matters. Sadly, I think like country music is the worst. I should just say that country music is the worst.
You could just stop there. Yeah.
Yeah. Country music is the worst, you know, criminal of the single game right now. I think it's far worse than like pop music and any kind of like alternative rock indies, you know, arena, just because there's a bazillion country artists and their albums I can name that they have one single on it and the rest is absolute like filler, and they know it's filler. So it's not like that. That's something I rail against a lot, and probably it may or may not do me favors, but there again, purpose, hillbilly morals, got to be into radical truth.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I still am I still prefer the albums. I like listening. I mean, in the world of Spotify and Apple Music, you know, of course I use their radio suggestions or whatever and learn new music from that and the playlist. But I still love like putting on an album and listening straight through, you know, or at least trying to. It depends on what I'm doing. But so I'm with you. I mean, I think as an artist, it's tough to make that call because it really, to your point, it all depends on where you are in your career and what your goals are at that point in time. And I think that's sometimes difficult for artists that don't have somebody like yourself managing them or kind of advising them on that direction. But I was curious of your take, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's kind of segue into segment 2, which was really fun for me on this to do the research when you sent over some of the poets that you like, some of the lyricists and songwriters. While of course I'm familiar, I think most people are familiar with the name Charles Bukowski or Bukowski in general. I hadn't really got into any of his stuff outside of a few things here or there, and honestly nothing in a long time. So
right, I've kind of had like a moment of reacclimation with him too, a little bit, because it's your typical like you read that in college kind of a thing. Yeah. Everybody, you know, gets out of high school and it's like, oh, this is like edgy Bukowski stuff. Yeah. But it's even more, especially now when I'm a little bit older and I can be aware of him writing as an older person. Like, because even though he was older, when you're in college reading it, you're like, yeah, like he's like the man. And then you realize, no, this is like age. A lot of it is thematic to age and his morality and his
or lack thereof,
angst and anger and love and, you know, bitterness.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I went down a rabbit hole of quotes to try and pull for this particular segment, and I think I mentioned you also sent a couple of documentaries which I have not had a chance or opportunity to watch, but I'm super stoked on, and we'll talk about those in a minute too. But yeah, going into the Bukowski stuff, it was interesting because I was like, I know what I'm going to be reading in 2021 now that I've gone down this rabbit hole, and it's more Bukowski. And there were a couple of friends that reached out, and a couple of females that were like, I have mixed feelings on him. And I was like, look, I'm not going to say, I mean, because in researching him, it's very clear that he was most likely a misogynistic asshole in most regards, but that doesn't mean that there's not like a ton of wisdom and a ton of like just profound kind of ways to present things, which was what I was really kind of drawn into, I suppose. And I think there, you know, I obviously preface this with you and the in the document I shared, but I'll read a couple of these quotes and then kind of share where it took my mind, and then I'd love to just kind of get what you're feeling on it too. And and of course, everybody that's listening, I'll share links to these resources and stuff in the show notes as well. But these are the Bukowski quotes that I sent to Mary. This first one is: "People are strange. They are constantly angered by trivial things, but on a major matter, like totally wasting their lives, they hardly seem to notice." I mean, that one is, I think anybody can see where,
Finally.
yeah, very timely. I think anybody can kind of see where that one goes. But then the second quote, which I think pairs well with that one, is: "If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, and maybe even your mind. It could mean not eating for 3 or 4 days. It could mean freezing on a park bench. It could mean jail. It could mean derision. It could mean mockery, isolation. Isolation is the gift." And this is the little nugget there that I've stood with for a minute, is isolation is the gift. Then he goes on to say: "All the others are a test of your endurance, of how much you really want to do it. And you'll do it despite rejection and the worst odds. And it will be better than anything else you can imagine. If you're going to try, go all the way. There's no other feeling like that. You'll be alone. You'll be alone with the gods, and the nights will flame with fire. You will ride life straight to perfect laughter. It's the only good fight there is." And I think I mentioned to you in the email, like, the isolation is the gift. For me, that line, it just stands out because in 2020, the silver lining that we spoke on earlier, and the thing that I've really found some solace in, is really finding that moment of more moments of silence and solitude. And I think if we could become comfortable or more comfortable with isolation of our own selves, to really discover ourselves, or rediscover, or find out more about who we truly want to be and truly are, then maybe the world would be a better place all around. So that is what stuck out to me. Obviously, everything else in that second part is really relative to your career as a artist manager, and encouraging your artists to really go after it and go all the way. But I just, what are your takes on those two quotes? And
Well, I think definitely the isolation part reminds me of, I'm probably a broken record of how many times I say to my artists and my friends and anybody that suffering is privilege. It is your privilege to suffer. I joke sometimes that if my artists aren't suffering enough, that means that I'm not doing a good enough job. A lot of other managers have said that. I think actually Jerry Weintraub has a quote, something similar to that, who I mentioned the documentary on. But I think that you're right too, that the year has kind of forced the hand, and something about, like, being a musician or a performer of any kind, like an actor, or being in theater or dance or anything like that, is there's a stage persona you and a show persona you, and then there's the you that is, like, alone with yourself at night. And a lot of artists find themselves getting burnt out after they live the road life for a while, and they can't stand to be alone with themselves at the end of the day. And they're sometimes the people that have the best, most thorough identity on the stage. So I think that 2020 probably has been the hardest for people like that. It may be a good challenge in some ways, but it's definitely still been tough. I get it totally. I noticed, like, with productivity, you were saying you didn't know if you'd been more productive or less productive. Like, I noticed in the last 2 years, like, at this time I had all my Christmas presents for everybody meticulously bought and planned out. And this year I haven't gotten anybody anything, which is just not like me. And I realized it was because I was just so in routine of, like, and then now the routine's out the window. So maybe isn't great for, like, my friends and family who aren't getting as good gifts as they got last year. Also wasn't a great financial year for anybody.
Yeah,
So everyone's getting lumps of coal, but it was probably beneficial for me to, and everyone else, to kind of take a breather for a moment, if you can separate it from, the general hardship of everything else.
yeah, and I mean, I was looking at Backline Cares, or Backline, the mental health and awareness organization that's built around the music industry and trying to provide support for that. And I think I found an appreciation for kind of becoming more of a 2020 introvert in a way to truly like learn more about myself. But I can totally see the opposite being the case for a lot of folks in our industry that are just so used to being on the go, producing events, playing events, performing, all that stuff. And I could see it having the opposite effect and really causing or creating opportunity for depression. So, um,
Mm. And
yeah,
also, like, for artists, like all three of my artists and a lot of people that I know that have artists in the same boat, were in a very momentum building place. And so it was, I mean, not saying that everyone's not always building momentum, but they were in a place where they have records that they're sitting on, or they've had to release a record, or they had an entire tour. Like, the example with Ian, he had just come off opening for his hero and
yes,
getting his dreams like completed, and then came back and it was just everything was over.
yeah.
So I think that dip for a lot of people is just it was a big dip, and you had to do a lot to come back from it.
Yeah, that is, it's, I want to say sad, but it sucks, it really does suck. I mean, all three of your artists, I'm not as familiar with, Elizabeth Cook's catalog or her music, but I absolutely love Ian's stuff. And you could see from somebody like myself in the industry, you can see him kind of he was on that trajectory and see a lot of those really cool things happening. So I hate it for them, but I do think the ones that can maintain and get through this, I don't think they're not going to find it coming out of this either. You know what I mean? I do.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of people, consumers in general of the music and the events that we are involved with are raring and ready to get back out and support. It's just a matter of
Mhm.
how do we do it safely, obviously. So
Oh yeah, I'm a big believer that the rebound is going to be great. And that's why I keep trying to encourage people when they can and they're capable to get in the best fighting weight they are, because everyone's coming out swinging.
yeah,
So if you are going to be coming out, you might as well, take care of yourself
yeah,
as much as you can now to get ready.
100%. Well, speaking of musicians, songwriters, which I think all three of the artists you're talking about here are killer songwriters from the little bit that I know of them. Let's move on to the next quote, which I shared with you. You mentioned one of your favorites is Lucinda Williams, who I've grown to love and appreciate in a lot of different ways. And one of the bands I play in, we actually covered this tune that I shared this song with you, "The Fruits of My Labor." So I'll read this little excerpt, and I'm not going to sing it or try and read it in a singing voice in the way that she would, but I thought this was kind of apropos in the sense that it ties in for me. It ties in a little bit of the go all the way mentality that Bukowski talks about, but then it also talks a little bit about the need for. I feel like it talks about the need for change and going, changing your circumstances, if nothing else. So here we are, Lucinda Williams. This is an excerpt of lyrics from Fruits of My Labor. And she says, "Come to my world and witness the way things have changed. Because I finally did it, baby. I got out of LaGrange. I got in my Mercury, drove out west, pedal to the metal, my luck to the test." And then kind of goes on into the chorus section, which is, "I've been trying to enjoy all the fruits of my labor. I've been crying for you, boy, but truth is my savior. Baby, sweet baby, if it's all the same, take the glory any day over the fame." I love that line, that last line, like "take the glory any day over the fame." And I don't even necessarily take it like so literal, even though I think you can, but there's just something about it that's always stuck with me. But what's your take on those lyrics and maybe how they apply to your mentality of work?
Well, I totally agree. Because I think the reason I love Lucinda so much is because she writes about things that are like completely unbridled, off the rails. She's very good at describing feeling out of control, but she does it with lyrics that are obviously chosen succinctly and are so in control. And like that to me is like a very powerful and underrated and under talked about skill. That's what the best songwriters do, is they make you feel like you've experienced something completely out there, but they've done it within this little tiny range of a song, and usually very particular word choice. And I do agree though. I've always said like power's way more fun than money. and glory is way more fun than money. And I'd much rather be poor and have nothing in my bank account and be able to call 100 people and get something done than have $1 million in there. Like, money can only buy so much relevance. And that's what you're seeing like today, like even with like the influencer generation. Like, yes, you can have 1 million followers, but if you don't have enough loyal to take an action from it, it's not the same.
Yeah, it's like the whole pay to play, like you're saying. I mean, you can buy a bunch of followers, but if they're not going to take action or truly engage with your, in our case, what we're talking about with your art form or your services or expertise, then what's the point of buying those followers? Because it's only going to get you so far, you know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of artists who have rather large, what I would call politely as personality followings, but their records don't really move that much, and they don't, it makes the music take a back seat, which is like, I also though have a kind of controversial opinion, in my circles anyway. It's controversial, in other circles not, that there is innate talent in being an entertainer separately from being a songwriter. And some of the best entertainers sing some of the worst songs, but I still value their talent. Like when I watch, like, you know, your mainstream CMAs or ACMs or anything like that, like there's certain artists on there that I see the value in them as an entertainer. And I categorize it separately as its own talent and magical innate thing that has nothing to do with what they're performing. Now, there is a secondary part where you have to challenge what they're performing and why they're doing it, but that doesn't change that they were able to do it. Like there's entertainers I will watch where I'll be like, man, I wish they were singing something great because they are amazing.
Yeah. That's funny. I mean, thinking about performers and seeing shows as a fan, not just being on the business or back end side, but I think the last like legit concert I attended or saw as a fan, it's actually on my birthday. It was Sturgill Simpson and Tyler Childers in the arena here in Charlotte. And
oh, you got one of those in before they pulled the plug.
Yeah, yeah. I think I feel like they played like one or two more, and then whatever happened. But what's interesting, I mean, it was a great show just to be able to see that those two kind of powerhouses of songwriters on the same stage, I guess you could say. But it also, like, seeing a show in an arena is not that exciting for me, and part of that is I've been spoiled working for Live Nation, and like having a very VIP experience from a like visual and taking in a show I'm spoiled to that degree, and I'll admit that. But there is something to be said about those bigger shows because it's entertainment. It's not always about the song or the lyrics or like how it's written. And I going back to like country music, I feel like today's pop modern country, I mean, I would just be curious, like percentage wise, how many of those folks that are either winning awards or on the radio or whatever, how many of them actually wrote the song, you know?
Yeah.
Because so many of that kind of genre specific has turned into just entertainers performing somebody else's song is what I feel like. They maybe have like a unique voice or whatever, but I'm more of I'd rather it be their own art. And there's nothing, I mean, I play music out and I cover people too, so I get that. But when you're like putting records out that's written by everybody else but yourself, it's just weird to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird disconnect. But then also there is the side of it where I know songwriters who've written major cuts for those kind of entertainers, songs that they didn't necessarily consider that were going to be good for them, that weren't terrible songs, some of the better pop country songs I know, and they're pretty thrilled with, you know, how it worked out for them.
Yeah. The mailbox
I mean,
income.
I'm a snob personally, so like I am always going to look down my nose to it a little bit when it comes to that kind of stuff, but I also separate it into categories. Probably why. It's probably because I'm a manager and I know I can't get away with talking like too much shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I have to have a line where it stops.
Yeah. Well, that's understandable too. And yeah, I mean, I think of like Daryl Scott as somebody that I came to know, you know, years after grew up like hearing Dixie Chicks songs and like I think he wrote a song that Travis Tritt made famous too or something. But then like I still enjoyed those. They were great. I mean, obviously they were great. Those songs were winning awards with the artist singing them, but like then hearing Daryl do his version of it is just like blows me away, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that to some degree is probably because of the artisticness of my like being and wanting that true artist to do it or perform it. But yeah, I know we digressed a little bit off of the topics here. So, but going back to the Lucinda quote, I mean, also, I feel like she does so many, all of what you talked about, but she does it with such grace too. Like the way she uses those words and like imagery, like even in that song, you know, I think she's like the tangerine and persimmons and sugar canes and all these words that just like draw you in. And to your point, they're also like, there's so much more meaning behind it, probably for a lot of listeners to kind of pull what they want out of that too, which is really cool. So that one to me, like her got in my Mercury, drove out west, pedal to the metal, my luck to the test, and then trying to enjoy her fruits of her labor. Like I think of that as like, if it wasn't working in LaGrange, I got to go try something else. I got to change. I got to get somewhere and kind of, and really put my luck to the test. And so that'll lead me kind of into this last quote, which was a Jerry Weintraub, which I think is like your favorite based on what you said in the email. And this quote is relevant to change. And it says, do not get attached to the world as it is, because the world is changing. Something new is coming. And obviously that's super relevant right now with just the state of things. But, you know, how do you maybe you've never thought about it this way, but like, I'm curious is, how do you guide your artist and really keep, I mean, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but like keep them focused and okay with change and saying that like what you've done up to now is great, but how do we keep you moving forward and being okay and not afraid of that change?
Right. Well, some of it, and this is the struggle for like, I know a lot of people that have gotten into the business since I have, that are not necessarily younger than me, just have been in it like a couple years. And something that they really have a hard time with is when you're a manager, you have to be able to disconnect on a certain level from it, because you work really, really hard for this thing and you can never take ownership of it. It's not yours. Like, yes, you're doing it because you care about it and for a variety of other reasons. But it's not yours. So there's been major disappointments in my career where I wanted so bad for an artist to do something that I knew would make a huge change in their career trajectory, and they just wouldn't do it. Sometimes it was because they had a good reason not to do it, and that acceptance was a little easier. But then other times it was just because no. Like sometimes it's just no.
Yeah.
And like you have to accept that and move on. And it is not for the faint hearted, especially if you work really hard. But I go back to the space that they're creating stuff in. You know, I am not, I'm a taskmaster in the sense that I will get shit done in a semblance of sensible way, but I'm like not the average manager when it comes to being like needling and doing everything and cross every T and dot every I. I'm a lot more strategic, I think, in how to achieve the next thing. And I'm also a lot more wide open about what goalposts are. Sometimes, you know, in management, people's goalposts are just literally like a $sign and or amount of tour dates or, you know, things like that. And that comes from a lot of reasons. That's not just managers being greedy. Sometimes an artist is like, I'm married, I have a child, I need to have a home, I need to achieve this financial goal to feel secure. And that's totally part of it. But, you know, those goalposts exist, but then there's other goalposts, just like I have to spend 2 weeks more off the road this year to make sure I'm all right to go on. You know, burnout is just as big of a problem as not being motivated. I mean, most artists want to go play. In my experience, most artists want to go play and they want to get on the stage and do their songs for as many people as possible. It's the other stuff that is around that packages it, that is what is anxiety inducing or exhausting, like literally physically tiring. And that's what makes them sometimes not want to do it, you know. But letting them have their own space to figure it out. And then, like, you know, I'll nudge certain things. If it's something, I pick my battles because, you know, there's some stuff that I just know is not going to happen. But that's part of like that pivot and parlaying it and going like, you know, maybe this isn't right for them, but maybe it's right for somebody else. You know, that's been very useful to me, because even though, I mean, I only manage and I put my entire efforts into my 3 artists that I have right now, but like there's other artists that I've like parlayed stuff for that I went, you know, this is not going to be for Elizabeth or Morgan or Ian, but here's something that might make sense for you. And I don't have any skin in the game. I think that that's just how it should be.
Yeah.
And like, I, again, don't want to sound like the nicest person on the planet. I am not. I will go on a tirade and I will explain to somebody the reality of situations when necessary. But at the same time, like passing it around is not a bad idea, you know?
Well, and I think that circles back to what you were talking about, how you kind of, what in the way that you ended up really moving in full time into this industry is that a lot of it, and I found this to be similar from my approach. I mean, a lot of I've, as much as I love music, I've never really felt like the fanboy when it comes to being behind the scenes or like being involved in conversations or these bigger events. And it's really cool. And I feel very, very fortunate and grateful to be a part of some of the events that I have. But I think also it goes back to your point of like building the relationships, acknowledging and being aware that like, A, not to burn any bridges, but B, you don't want to, as soon as we meet and I know that you have access to this, I'm not going to hit you up for that access. It's more about building a relationship. And if there's an opportunity that presents itself that you have, and it doesn't make sense for me or an artist that I'm working with or whatever, then still being a resource and like trying to connect or suggest or have some way to really build some value in your relationship with that other person is super important, but also not letting it overwhelm you to like try and either like get that autograph in the fanboy perspective or like, you know, ask for that big ask from that record label because you've made this one connection, you know? So I guess timing is really important and crucial, I think, to truly building those authentic relationships you're talking about. You were talking about earlier anyways, but yeah. And I think also like dealing with the change and, you know, trying to not become unattached to what is right now is something that I think we all need to kind of be more aware about. And 2020 of all years is a perfect year to realize that like what we were attached to as norms before, and you and I were talking about this, before we went live, I don't know that there's going to be such thing as like the old normal. Whatever comes in 2021, especially within our industry, is probably going to just be a new normal, you know? So
the good news is, and I was saying this when this first was just becoming like in March and April, when things were just starting to, like the reality of the diciness of the situation was like setting in, I was like, the good thing is like, if you're a touring musician or you've been out on the road with artists, like, or you work in the music business, we're kind of like the best people to have this happen to, because it's just like, okay, it's just always changing. There's always going to be something new. There's always going to be something altered. Like, you know, if you've not gone on a tour and had your flights canceled or had like a weather event or somebody did not show up to their, you know, bus call or whatever it was, like, then you haven't experienced the music business. Like if somebody hasn't offered you a bunch of money and then never called you again, you haven't experienced the music business, you know? It's just like, it's the worst people and the best people, and they're all sometimes they're the same person.
Yeah, it's a very unique industry in that regard, and I think a lot of people that haven't experienced it, obviously, understandably, don't necessarily realize or get that. Now, going back to kind of wrap this up before we go into the third segment and final segment, as a manager, what you know, talking about the change and how you kind of help guide your artist, for any folks that are out there that are listening that maybe are not at the level of an Ian No or you know, Elizabeth Cook or even some smaller names than that, is there any words of encouragement or kind of like areas of focus that you would say for somebody and maybe not even focus, but also like lobbying for why they need to consider actually investing in a manager. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. What do you have for them?
Well, oh, I literally have like,
Do we need to make another hour out of it?
yeah, I really should just do a TED talk on this kind of. But I mean, you have to remember first of all that someone like Ian or Elizabeth also wasn't at the level of Ian or Elizabeth a few years ago. Everyone starts somewhere, and it takes everyone a different journey and a different thing. And also the music business is the business of reinvention. So you can screw up real bad in the music business, and you can still have a comeback as long as you're not Ryan Adams and you've done something horrible. As long as you're not him,
Yeah.
or some of the like real bad offenders,
Yeah.
you can come back. But the it's gonna be tough. But once you accept it and move forward, like there's only one way. It's just forward. Like there's no such thing as moving backward once you start on like a journey and you're just committed to it. Like, yes, you may have failures, but they're not, I don't like that, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing, because even with failures, they didn't change where I was before I had the opportunity presented to me. I was still in the same spot. It's just that an opportunity to move forward, I just didn't pick up the ladder.
Mhm.
So I think if keeping that mindset is important. And the other thing is, the old ways are tried and true and do work, and touring and finding opportunities for yourself do still work. I do think that. But you also have to have an awareness of the current landscape of how to get things seen and heard. And it has to be both. Like I know too many people that are obsessed with the internet and then don't play any shows anywhere or go tour anywhere or go meet anybody. And then I know other people that tour all the time and then cannot grasp the internet. And it usually takes both. And it usually takes in investing in yourself on both of those platforms, and it's a relationship business. Like as far as like getting a manager, getting an agent, getting, all those pieces, basically and a lot of music artists don't know this because they just haven't had the experience yet. When you are going to go try to get a label or an A&R person to look at you, like when I was doing A&R, like most of those people want you to already have a team in place. They want you to have an agent. They want you to have a manager. They want you to even maybe have a publicist or like, people that are on board, and shows that there is a group ready to go forward all at once. Like it is very rare to see a label deal get done with an artist that has nobody around them. Or they usually have at least one pillar somewhere, that's helping directing the cause. But getting the right people is going to have to be you building relationships with people that are at Live Nation, like promoters, or getting on a festival bill and getting your name seen on a couple of things, like where you were like the literal last or next to last person on a big festival bill or a regional festival bill, but that was enough to get you onto the next thing. It's getting a little name recognition and getting one person to, come aboard and say, like, here's the rest of the people you need to know, but people always are like, if you just go and make great music, it'll happen to you. And I think there is some truth to that, because the artists that I work with, if I disappeared today or I never met them, I believe that they would still be successful right now with somebody else that isn't me. Like, I'm better than whoever that other person is, probably, and nicer for sure, and definitely have a better sense of humor. But they would still be successful because the depth of their talent is so strong. Yeah. So if you have that, you already have a leg up. But there's also people that aren't that talented that do well just because they have the other piece. It's just about balancing all those things until you can get the snowball, and then eventually you'll have the team and you'll just be a musician for a living, which is like the goal.
Right.
And it won't be, it'll be like how rich people say money doesn't make you happy. You'll be the same person. You'll just be a musician for a living.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, all great advice, and that's one thing I think that goes hand in hand with that is really being authentic in your relationship building, because even if you have good talent, you have to go out and do the work and like continue to hone your craft and write more songs and perform more songs and all that stuff, so that somebody like yourself can come across that said talent. Sierra Farrell is somebody I think of as like a perfect example of that. I was involved in producing a music related conference here in Charlotte, August 2019 now, I guess. And Dolph Ramser was one of the speakers on one of the panels, and you know, we were talking about Sierra, and I think like somebody just happened to send him. She had never recorded an album. She just happened to be putting these YouTube videos together that were just pretty basic at the time, you know. But somebody sent it to Dolph, and like that's the guy that happened to be like you're saying, like she's got the talent. Now I'm gonna go reach out to her and find out how we can help her take it to that next level. And yeah, I mean, you can reach out and try and pitch yourself all you want, but if you don't have the other pieces to that puzzle, then nobody like yourself or in any, whether it's a talent buyer, promoter, or a manager like yourself that might be considering taking on new talent, the artist obviously has to have something there that kind of persuades you to buy in too. So
yeah, I think like when you do a record release, for me, when we talk amongst like the different team members I've had, you know, the goal is for people to feel like they cannot escape you in a way, like, but in a gentle escape way, not like in a prison of you. And I think that is true when you're an artist and you're trying to persuade people that are in a position of power to help you, that they see you, like they want their ego. Managers are egomaniacs and psychos, you know, and they want to feel like they found you.
Yeah.
Like I am aware that I have that side of me that kind of lives in like dreamland, and then I have the realist side of me that is aware that my artist would be fine without me because they're so talented. But a lot of managers are egomaniacs, and A&R people, label people, they all feel like they're in their job because they're the best at it and they're going to find the best thing. So they don't want you to elevate or pitch them so much as they want to feel like they happened upon you.
They discovered it.
Even if you did pitch it and they loved you, they would never tell anybody that. They would say, "Oh, I saw them on a YouTube that I don't remember who sent it to me, and I found them, and I flew to, you know, West Virginia, and I went into a coal mine, and they were in there." You know, like it will all, that narrative will always exist, no matter what. But they want to feel like they found you. So if they're at a festival and they walk past your stage, they want to be the one that was like, "Oh, that was really great," you know.
Yeah, I discovered that talent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, let them just believe that. It's fine. They go through enough.
Right. Well, cool. Well, thank you for sharing some wisdom and in that regard. I know a lot of the folks that I engage with locally here in Charlotte and kind of around the area are aspiring. I mean, they're professional musicians, but you know, all artists are trying to grow their following and reach that kind of next level in their career. So I know that's a very valuable insight that you have. So thanks for sharing that. All right, on to segment 3. I don't know if you got a chance to check this one out, but like I ask all of my guests, are there any, you know, maybe nonprofit organizations or social missions that you're really kind of buying into full force right now that you'd like to talk about or share or shine a spotlight on? It could be a nonprofit organization from your hometown or whatever, but what you got?
There's a couple things. I always shout out Music Cares anytime I'm asked about a nonprofit, just because I know people personally that have had their lives saved by being able to go to rehab, you know, for drug treatment, alcohol treatment in the middle of a tour when they did not have anything else, any other opportunities. And, you know, I have like a personal thing where I watched somebody that I knew be accepted to walk in the doors there without anything else after a few phone calls, just because they were a musician, and not some sort of star power musician, a regular, you know, everyday blue collar working musician, and they helped them. And so I'm always quick to shout out that. Secondly, definitely, I I'm going to say it because it is a nonprofit and it's a little political leaning, because I'm very big on politics too, which I have been advised against being, but I cannot help myself. And that's the Hood to the Holler organization, which is Charles Booker's nonprofit, where he is helping to organize in Kentucky specifically, where there's outreach for like progressive parties, progressive policies, and just bringing those kind of discussions to communities in like rural Appalachia and Kentucky, where those folks have not been engaged with at all. Mm-hmm. I am of the, again, slightly controversial opinion that Appalachia isn't as red as it seems. They've mostly just been forgotten by blue state or a blue party activity. They haven't had somebody come there because they didn't feel like it was worth engaging, and it's a long game and it's an organizational game. But both of those are ones that affect me personally.
Yeah, I 100% know and agree, and am very familiar with Music Cares as well, and we'll certainly link both those organizations. But yeah, I think Music Cares is always doing some fundraising, and then Hood to Holler I've not heard of, but that, I mean, the name right there is like super catchy, and the alliteration is really cool. So I'm excited to check that out a little bit, and I agree with you, especially not to digress into full political discussion here, because that would lead to a whole nother hour or longer. But yeah, there was, the reality, I think, and I don't have any firsthand experience, but I think it's fair to say in rural country areas, their realities are very different than realities that maybe somebody that lives in a more urban, city environment. And it's fair in some ways for them to feel forgotten and feel like their voice isn't being heard, but I think it's also just as much their responsibility to be able to engage in those conversations on both sides. And that could be the hood or the holler, So that sounds cool.
There's a lot of disconnect in messaging about the unifying desire. The workers of America are not red or blue. It's and that's why I really appreciate Charles Booker. He was a candidate that ran against Amy McGrath in Kentucky in the primary and lost to her just barely, and then she ran against Mitch McConnell. There's a lot of discussion about whether he might run against Rand Paul in the next election as a senator. He was and he's from Louisville, but he went to every Kentucky county, and is just a very charismatic, interesting person who wants to talk to your average Kentuckian. It doesn't matter if you're rural, doesn't matter if you are in the west end of Louisville. And I think that dialogue's just powerful.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think conversation is really what is probably needed more now than ever, and especially in scenarios like that you're talking about, because, if somebody, especially from the political realm, isn't going and having those conversations, then it's safe to assume the folks on the other end are consuming it from media, which is going to be obviously very partisan in a lot of ways, and sometimes divisive in nature. So that's cool. I can't wait to check that out a little bit more, and as I mentioned, share it. Well, thank you again, Mary. We've gone over the time that I told you I would allot for you, but I really, really am so appreciative of you taking the time out of the day to join me for this conversation. And is there anywhere, so Young Mary Records,
mm-hmm. You can actually go. I've been holding back. I have like 1,000+ subscribers to a newsletter that I have not sent them their first newsletter because I just wanted to wait until things settled, and I also wanted to figure out what I wanted to tell them. But it's neverrefuseamuse.com, and you can join the newsletter. And starting in the new year, I'm going to send both like small short essays that have to do with news stuff, but also stuff about my artists.
Cool.
Like sometimes it'll just be an artist update. Sometimes it'll just be me talking about an artist I don't even work with. Sometimes it'll be me talking about politics, and they can delete that email. It's fine. It's whatever.
Sometimes it might be your poetry. So
it might be.
So say it again. Never
Never
refuse
refuse a muse.
a muse. Never refuse.
NEVERREFUSEAMUSE.com.
Neverrefuseamuse.com. I
Yes,
love that. That's cool. So we're breaking news right now. Like Mary's new thing. Never refuse a muse. I love it. Okay, cool. Well, we'll definitely link that in the show notes as well. But thanks, listeners, everybody, for tuning in. Head over, give give Mary a follow on Young Mary Records. I think that's your only social handle, right? You don't have anything for the management side that it all falls under that. Okay,
I'm
cool.
thinking about, it's all just lives there. So I'm just
I think that's fine. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. I kind of fight that. It's like with this whole podcast, it's like, do I create, God, I don't know. It's so much to keep up with one, let alone have multiple. So yeah, Young Mary Records on Instagram, I know, probably Facebook as well, and Twitter and all that stuff. And I'll put all these links in the show notes. So listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you next week. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. We'll see you in real life sometime.
Cheers.